Hi, everyone. G. Phillip Shoultz III here with you for the final installment in our series of videos about People of This Land, our concert featuring the New World Symphony of Dvořák and then also Hiawatha's Wedding Feast by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. When you get to the concert, you'll be able to get this wonderful program book, which has so many notes there, details about the pieces and about context, but really wanted to, in this series, share more from a personal perspective than I could put on paper. The biggest issue with this concert repertoire would be if these pieces were written today, we would probably consider them dabbling in the realm of cultural appropriation. And cultural appropriation, it seems to be a buzzword. It's a real thing. And what it means is when you take something from another tradition other than your own without asking, and you make profit off of it. That's really the nuts and bolts of the definition of cultural appropriation. We know that appropriation happens on a regular basis throughout society, throughout culture. We couldn't live without borrowing and using things from other traditions. The real crux of the matter comes with power and the sense of who has the power. And we know that cultures from Western European countries, particular cultures that we consider the white dominant traditions, are the ones that have held power and hold that against cultures from other places, from other traditions that don't have the wealth. And that's the issue. That's where the crux of the matter comes to. What my belief is about both of these composers and about both of these pieces is that the way that each of them engaged with culture was really beyond their time. It was something that they were doing in an intentional manner that transcended the time that they lived in. They were ahead of their time, so to speak. And I will share that with you in a detailed way, talking about each of the composers and each of the pieces, so that my thesis is that the curiosity that both Dvořák and Coleridge-Taylor led their lives with, and the people they engaged with, allowed them to create these pieces, not in a vacuum for the sense of stealing, but instead in a way of amplifying and celebrating and introducing the Western world to traditions from Native American and African American cultures and musics and sounds that they thought needed to be part of the canon. Thus, it makes it worthwhile for us to take this challenge on to perform this beautiful music for you on Saturday night. So I'll begin first by talking about Symphony number 9, Symphony in E minor. We call it From the New World, and we know that it's known as a New World Symphony because it was composed while he was the director of the National Conservatory of Music in America from 1892 to 1895. And I'll share a little picture here of Dvořák with you all that I think you'll find fascinating here as I'm talking through things here. Dvořák's experiences in America, combined with his longing for home, color his music with a mixture of emotions that strikes a chord in the hearts of all listeners. The New York Evening Post wrote of the symphony, "Anyone who heard it could not deny that it is the greatest symphonic work ever composed in this country." Part of the reason From the New World became the name associated with this extraordinary work is that it includes so many of the influences that Dvořák absorbed through his exposure to both African American and Native American melodies, rhythms, and cultures. As many of you probably know, Dvořák had deep appreciation for the Negro spiritual. And he learned that thanks in part to his relationship with Harry T. Burleigh. Now, Dvořák was looking for truly American musical idiom, and he found major inspiration in the African-American spirituals. They were known as the Negro spirituals. I still consider them Negro spirituals because that's the name that was given to us at that time. And they were among the first bodies of music composed on this soil that are uniquely American. And so all of you, no matter what your identity is, you are a part of that heritage of the Negro spiritual tradition. Your relationship to the music might be more complex and nuanced based on your cultural tradition. But if you're an American, it is your music as well. And so Dvořák heard them first in arrangements by Harry T. Burleigh when he was a conservatory student. Dvořák listened to Burleigh sing these songs that Burleigh had learned from his grandfather, who was formerly enslaved. This relationship that Dvořák shared with Burleigh really allowed him to be curious in how he sought to learn more about the spiritual tradition and to incorporate some of these musical gestures and melodic structures in his own works. Now, a little about Dvořák. Those who knew him maintained that he exuded a level of charm and friendliness that is rare. He possessed a sense of humanity and well-being that combined with a healthy and joyful attitude to life and learning. And I think this speaks to the way he approached the sounds from different cultures with inquiry and with wonder. The second movement of the New World Symphony is a shining example as he sets the emotionally evocative and haunting English horn solo, now known to many of us as Going Home. Going home, going home, I'm a going home. We know that that art song was written after the symphony and inspired by this English horn solo. And it sounds like it could have come from a Negro spiritual, although it was original music. Now, Dvořák maintained there are no actual quotations of the spiritual melodies in New World Symphony, but some point to the presence of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot in the opening movement and a couple of others. I'll let you be the judge of that when you listen. This curiosity of Dvořák also lent itself to indigenous life in America, as Dvořák was a huge fan of the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And we now know that the third movement scherzo is inspired by Hiawatha's wedding dance scene from Longfellow's epic poem. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That one there, you can hear kind of these echoes of Native American life and rhythm and tradition. And this inspiration to Longfellow's poem is one of the nuggets that really ties our program together. You see, because Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was also inspired by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So much so, in fact, that he composed more than a dozen works based on Longfellow's writings and even named his son Hiawatha Coleridge-Taylor. Now, here's an interesting tidbit, friends. These guys were not the only two composers of the Victorian era who were inspired by Longfellow. We know that Benjamin Britten, Edward Elgar, Franz Liszt, and Arthur Sullivan, among others, were those who wrote works based on Longfellow's writings. Now, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was an English composer, conductor, and political activist hailed as a 20th century genius by critics. He was born in Holberg in 1875 to an English mother and his father, who originally was from Sierra Leone. And Coleridge-Taylor identified as Anglo-African. He was named, interestingly enough, after Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the poet, and the poet became a great source of inspiration for him. Hiawatha's wedding feast that we are going to share with you tomorrow evening, this wonderful score here, such a rich and beautiful piece of music, was based on the Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, as we mentioned just a moment ago. The piece is scored for tenor solo, chorus, and orchestra, and was first performed in 1898 when Coleridge-Taylor was only 22. The cantata tells the story of Hiawatha's marriage to Minnehaha, with the tenor soloist taking on the role of Hiawatha and the chorus describing the characters and the events of the story. We have Hiawatha and his grandmother, Nokomis, who were joined by their friends, Papokiwis, the dancer, Chibiabus, the musician, and Iagu, the storyteller. And together they put on an elaborate and glorious wedding celebration. The music is influenced by rhythmic gestures found on the continent of Africa, along with elements of African American spirituals, the Negro spiritual, and Native American melodies, creating a unique and vibrant sound. The piece became a beloved classic of choral repertoire, thanks in part to Coleridge-Taylor's skilled orchestration, including dense and sumptuous harmonies, rhythmic energy and vitality, and vivid storytelling. Now, even though the Black community here in America had an ongoing battle against racism, Hiawatha's Wedding Feast was so popular that he had 3 tours conducting that piece, along with other things, here in the United States. Coleridge-Taylor became a cultural hero here in the US because many choral societies wanted something different besides Handel's Messiah. And this secular text with such interest and intrigue and beautiful music was appealing that people were performing it all throughout the country. He was so much of a hero that an African-American ensemble in the Washington, D.C. area named the Choral Society in his honor. In fact, his work across music and politics was so well received that Coleridge-Taylor conducted the United States Marine Band, and in 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt invited him to visit the White House for a personal visit. Charles Elford, who's the author of The Black Mahler, the Samuel Coleridge-Taylor story, called him a megastar. He says, I think one of the things that was so popular about him at the time was that he had a wonderful piece of music out of the secular background that was so easy to sing. And it was hugely popular because it took on a life of its own. We don't know why Coleridge-Taylor found such inspiration in this particular poem, but we do know that it was of great meaning to him, as was all of Longfellow's works. I mentioned he wrote more than a dozen pieces based on Longfellow's works. Elford says perhaps it's because the poem is very musical in its inherent rhythm, and it suited Coleridge-Taylor's writing style. But we also believe that perhaps there was something deeper than the poem itself. Perhaps it's the character, the title character, Hiawatha. Many people point to the fact that not only was Hiawatha's being married to Minnehaha and her sudden death happening, and then there's a departure to the other world that happens later in the poem, but Hiawatha, among other things, brought together warring tribes of America at the time. And people saw Coleridge-Taylor as doing a similar thing through his music. I think he even saw himself as someone who could bridge traditions. He drew on his African heritage. He was curious about the African-American traditions, and he identified with his English, his British heritage as well. And so perhaps this was his big gift, the fact that he could unite people, different classes, different races, different ages and genders, bringing people together. Coleridge-Taylor, friends, communicated and collaborated with all of the era's leading African-American literary figures and intellectuals, including Paul Laurence Dunbar, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Booker T. Washington, who described Coleridge-Taylor as a man of the highest aesthetic ideals. So with this, I come back to my hypothesis that both Dvořák and Coleridge-Taylor were not simply appropriating sounds from traditions that they hadn't learned about. Both of them developed relationships with people from those traditions, and they did their best to learn the stories and to draw on those stories and to present them in a way that would be not only respectful, but as true to the tradition as they possibly could. But we know that the early 1900s was a different time, and what they knew about engaging with culture and what was appropriate at that time was very different than what's appropriate now. So perhaps if they were living today and they were approaching these works, they would come with a great foreword by people from the traditions, or there would be some surrounding materials giving background around how they came upon these melodies and the traditions, and what in the stories, particularly of the Song of Hiawatha and Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, what was true and what they elaborated on to make it more um, uh, exciting, right, for us to hear in performance. Here's another tidbit to leave you with. We know that Coleridge-Taylor did not earn a lot of money from Hiawatha's wedding feast. In fact, the people who got rich were the publishers. Coleridge-Taylor signed that away. And when he died at the age of 37, it's unfortunate that his family wasn't able to take the earnings that were rightfully his from this wonderful work because of the way he sold the music to the publishing company, and they were the ones who profited, not him. So it's just another argument for me and my hypothesis that both of these individuals approach this music with curiosity, approach these traditions with curiosity, and thanks to them, we are the beneficiaries to be able to listen and absorb these wonderful sounds, this tremendous story that Longfellow shares, and we can do our own homework to learn more about where truth meets with fiction. And each of us can be part of the answer to sharing truth, clearing up misinformation, and really doing our best to celebrate the wonderful, diverse cultural traditions that are around us here today. I sure hope this has helped you to prepare to hear this concert on tomorrow evening, April 20th, and I look forward to seeing you there as we celebrate the people of this land. Until then, take good care of yourselves and each other. Bye now, friends.